Hello, my name is Stefano De Maria, and today I will be presenting on the associations between subjective well-being and health. So, in this presentation, I will cover four central topics. First being a quick refresher on what subjective well-being exactly is, also some correlations between subjective well-being and career success, a couple of mediators in the associations between subjective well-being and health, and last but not least, how culture intersects into this connection. Now, I chose to cover this unique connection because I wanted to see specifically what variables get in the way of making this a perfect 100% correct correlation. I still remember learning about subjective well-being in my positive psychology course, and I wanted to take a deeper dive into subjective well-being and how it influences physical and mental health. It wasn't too long before I discovered this immediate correlation and also how it interacts in the professional world and on a much broader global cultural scale. Now, for subjective well being, this definition I found from Professor Edward Diner of the University of Illinois, also known as Dr. Happiness. What a title! This definition was one that I felt best encapsulated this concept. So, the individual element is obviously critical. You have the words individual and also their own lives. So, we're not talking about how well you're doing on a local, national, or global level, not compared to anyone on earth. This isn't about how happy you are compared to everyone at your workplace or your university. This is about how happy you are according to your own personal feelings. Now, for evaluate and appraise, those terms are how you measure your well being, whether it be taking some ridiculous 60 question survey or just ranking on a scale of 1 to 10 how you feel on that day. And of course, we're going back to the individual element with their own lives. This isn't the life of yours against Elon Musk's. This isn't the life of yours against a conflict refugee. This is your own life or their own life. Now, subjective well being is really a trifecta. First tenet would be decreased negative affect. Affect, of course, referring to moods that influence behavior and can be represented in facial expressions and in vocal intonation. Second is a strong positive affect. Now, it is possible to score high in both positive and negative affect, as those scales measure two differing concepts. And last but not least, we have life satisfaction. So, how happy are you with where your life is? Have you fulfilled your goals, your dreams? Do you have meaningful pursuits? Now, subjective well being is associated with optimism, mostly with the presence of positive affect and subjective well being, and having positive expectations about the future. An additional critical association to note would be eudaimonic well being, coming from the Greek term eudaimonia, which roughly translates to happiness or pleasure, prosperity. So, eudaimonic well being is essentially having a purpose in life, having that strong social base to go off, and having this sense of mastery in your work and personal fulfillment. This is not the fulfillment you would get from driving a Porsche down the Autobahn at high speeds. that's much more temporary. This is the fulfillment from reaching those life goals you have set for yourself, whichever those may be, and in my case, just sitting out looking at some gorgeous mountains. Now, there's a large body of work of research on connections between subjective well being and professional or career success. Looking through the literature, it is clear that scoring high on measures of subjective well being is associated with being more likely to finish tertiary education, more likely to be satisfied and enjoy your occupation, enjoy what you do, not having to get up and go to work like, oh my god, why am I going through this again? In addition to making higher wages, even. Now, this all, of course, highlights the importance of professional stability for adults and also just opens up the floodgates to explore these brand new connections between professional stability, financial stability, and health to conduct further research essentially into how social and subjective well being can play into both. And of course, I bring this up because as an adult, good health is borderline impossible to obtain without this professional financial stability, especially in the developed world, especially as I'm recording this during the coronavirus pandemic of 2020. We're, we're seeing the effects of this lack of professional stability on a lot of people, which is devastating and very unfortunate. Now, we do have a handful of mediators that I did spoil earlier to discuss in this relationship between subjective well being and health. This, of course, is not just a one way correlation. We're going to have confounding variables. Hoorah! So, a 2010 study found these two systems, the cardiovascular system, which is your heart, your lungs, and the endocrine system, which is your brain, your pancreas, reproductive organs, adrenal glands, to be the big mediators in this correlation between positive subjective well being and health. Now, folks who exhibit high subjective well being are far more likely than others to exhibit behaviors which are aimed at improving or maintaining their health. And also, going through the literature, age and gender are two critical mediating variables in this correlation between subjective well being and health. That is, these results will differ if they're filtered by who you're sampling from the demographics of age and gender. What's very interesting to note is that ethnicity and race have not been found to be significant moderators or mediators in this correlation as of yet, as of 2020. Now, with the cardiovascular system, we do have a positive correlation between strong cardiovascular health and positive social well being, strong subjective well being. No shocker there. But what's interesting about the study was that it was done in the long term, so 10ish in this study's case, years out. So you had one data set that was taken at the start of the experiment, and then the participants were monitored a decade after the start. In addition, moving on to the endocrine system, in 2009, there was a study conducted using type 2 diabetics, and this measured affect and blood sugar levels. And what they found was negative affect was quite predictive of elevated glucose levels the following day. Now, one last topic I would like to cover is how culture plays a factor in this fascinating relationship. So, it likely isn't a surprise, of course, that negative emotions are correlated with worse health in many, many, many cultures. But what is a negative emotion? What is responsible for said negative emotion? Well, if you ask somebody in the United States or really any Western educated country, Germany, Australia, Canada, you get the gist of it. Negative emotions are found to be mainly focused on the individual. However, if we shift the focus over to East Asia, Japan, Hong Kong, South Korea, negative emotions are much more likely than in Western countries to be specific to situations and relationships instead of being on the individual. This, of course, is reflective of the divide between individualistic and collectivistic tendencies. Now, there are two primary future directions for research in this fascinating correlation. A critical step for future research will be to measure the impacts of variables such as geographic environment, income, and quality of social relationships in this subjective well being health connection. Also, a lot more longitudinal long term studies are needed, so collecting data over 5, 10, 12, 15 years, as challenging as it sounds. Also, might be time to consider updating the positive and negative affect schedule, which is used for so many studies related to subjective well being. As you can see, this schedule, or PANAS as it's referred to, is over 30 years old at the taping of this presentation. So it might be high time to consider giving it a little update. Not completely throwing it out, of course, but just see what we can tweak with this new literature that we have. Now, coming up on the end of this presentation, I do want to leave you, dear watcher or viewer, with a little question. And this is extremely recent to when this was recorded, but how would you think the coronavirus pandemic of 2020 has modified this connection between subjective well being and health? Has it modified this connection in the first place? Would countries that were hit harder by the pandemic experience a deterioration in either variable? If you just so happen to be watching or listening to this presentation 5, 8, 10, 12 years after the original publication date of 2020, how has this relationship changed? What new research has emerged? I would love to hear. Here are the references I consulted for this presentation. Thank you so much for watching and listening along to my presentation. Have a splendid day.